I'd like to call to order the Board of Education Finance Committee meeting for Monday, September 23rd, 2024. Do we have any public comments?
Excuse me.
Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3, approval of the minutes for August 12th, 2024. Bonnie, did you receive any corrections?
No.
Does anyone have any at this time?
No.
All right, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So approved?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, the minutes are approved. Item number 4, discussion and consideration. We have the overview of the 2024-25 final budget. Mr. Latham.
All right, excited. All right, well, good evening to our Geneva CUSD Finance Committee and the fine folks at home. So this is the point in our budget process where we bring a budget before our Board of Education for adoption. And that allows us to move forward with the finalization of that document with ISB and to our Kane County Clerk's Office, so it's on file and available for our public. So tonight's presentation is the final presentation and a recommendation for adoption. This is for fiscal year July 1st, 2024 through June 30th of 2025. A little bit about how we got here. We've had several meetings on our budget process. Mostly those are through the preliminary process, technology, operations and maintenance, transportation, and education. And then we brought to you a draft budget where we start to formulate what our spend plan will look like and that spending for the year. We came back with a tentative budget. We did put that on display as required by law. We had no comments on our tentative budget, so we thank the public for having confidence in us. And then we're here this evening for our final budget. All right, so the overview, this is our goals that we want through how we're going to invest our dollars in the school district and through the education process. Uses several tools and planning devices that we use, a lot of estimations and review and forecasting, as well as a compilation of spending needs across each school level, each department, and what we'll need to take us through the end of the year. Include such things as grants and other dollars that we'd have. We are a Tier 4 school district, which means we're fully funded by our local dollars, and we thank our citizens and our taxpayers for that. And then we've also gone through a process of things, as you know, such as our capital plan and other investments that we'll need to make through the fiscal year. Again, our operating funds are Fund 10, which is our education fund, Fund 20, which is our operations and maintenance fund, Fund 40, which is our transportation fund, 50 is our IMRF, Social Security, FICA, Medicare, which is basically the retirement fund, our working cash, which is our investment fund, and our tort fund, which has anything to do with insurance or liabilities that we might have. Our other funds include Fund 30, which is our debt service fund, which is how we pay our bond and interest payments for loans that we would have had in previous years. Our capital projects, which is our investment in our capital throughout the year and our projects that we have, such as this evening we talked about boilers, and we talked about flooring, and we talked about school improvements. And lastly, our life safety, which you'll see also referenced as fire prevention. And those are safety investments that we make through different projects separate than our capital fund because they require a different levy process, funding, and spend requirement. So some of the major changes from the tentative, as you know, we still hire employees. So we reviewed that process. They could be placed at different points into our compensation model. And then we also looked at some of our grant expenditures where we would spend those down. We have what are called carryover dollars that we maybe didn't spend this year. This is the last year of ESSER, and we spent those last dollars this month. And so all those dollars that we had through that part of our trying times are over. And then we also look at all of our agreements, we review our health insurance. We look at employees, what they may elect. They may take single or family, and that would depend on how we rebudget. And then our Mid-Valley tuition came in with the final tuition cost for our special needs students, as well as our Fox Valley Career Center. And then last, any federal or state grant carryovers and changes that we would have. Sometimes we'll place a grant forward to ISB to review, and they may have amendments or some changes in spending they would like. And then lastly, as you'll see tonight, our fund transfers, which is where we take our excess or surplus dollars and we move those to other funds that carry out initiatives. And this year, the major one is going to be in our capital projects. So this is our proposed budget from tentative to what we last tonight for adoption. I'll focus on the right side, which is really the FY25 proposed or final budget. So our education fund, we're requesting $79,721,838. That will cover all of our education needs that we believe we'll have for the year. Our operations and maintenance fund is $16,040,109. That ensures that we have all the funds that we need for safe school grounds and proper maintenance, as well as repairs that we'll need to make throughout the year that are separate from our capital fund. We have some debt service needs. I will point out to the committee that we will be paying off our 2007 A bond, which we've had since 2007. So that's a significant bond that we've carried quite a long period of time. Preceded me, it's nice to get that paid off, and then we have 2 bonds left. That is our 2017 and 2019 refunding bonds. So it's nice to get down to 2 bonds. We've had as many as, I think, 6 or 7 since I've worked for the district. And then that leaves us our transportation, $4,953,387. That'll cover our needs plus costs that we'll have that we've saved up for operations. As you know, we have some investments out there as well, and we'll be doing some fund transfers. Our municipal retirement just kind of mirrors what we pay for compensation. It's fixed that we have. There are some adjustments between our different retirement funds every year, but that amount is $446,553. Now, the last couple of funds that we have for revenue are simply just income that we have from our investments. So the $125,000 for capital projects, the $712,000 for working cash, the $1,500 for tort, and the $42,000 for our fire prevention and safety are all investments that we anticipate a return based on what we've already invested on behalf of the district. In total, we're looking at a total revenue receipt of $119,802,398. Now, some of this is going to be needed for some of our capital improvements. So part of the plan also is to do some transfers of those revenues, which will really become fund balances. We're estimating a need of $17,687,684. In total, the revenue that would be coming into funds either by new revenue or transfer revenue, $137,490,082, our bottom line right here. So the difference between the tentative to the final is really those last transfers we need to shore up our capital improvement fund to make sure we have adequate funds for that. Keep in mind that we do have some dollars that come in, some improvements that come in at the end of June. We may not receive those bills until July, or we may have some carryover projects that go over the summer, and then we have to pay those either July, August, or in September. So those were last-minute adjustments that were made by the business office to account for that. Any questions at this point on revenue?
I just have on the education fund, the tentative, and then went down, that's revenue that didn't come in because of?
It's likely not revenue didn't come in. Those were last adjustments either on what I think the economy would return on for a return, but the primary one for this year was our personal property replacement tax. And we kind of get that estimate that originally comes out, and then it kind of gets finalized. And I was probably a little bit conservative there. We also have a couple tax appeals at the Property Tax Abatement Board, which is in downstate, that I didn't want to fully account for in case there are some results there that are not favorable on our side. So I pulled back what I thought would be a little bit of the revenue on the taxation side to account for that if that occurred. Other questions? Okay, on the expenditure side. So very much like the revenue, we do make adjustments to the expenditure side. Most of those are compensation. Some of those are also some other areas that we may see that come in after we did the original draft or tentative. They could be some estimations of costs or purchase services. They could be also things that we feel like we need to add in there, maybe some contingencies as well, or some last minute requests that came in from either principals or schools or departments that weren't part of the original draft. So asking the Board of Education for adoption would be our expenditures for education fund of $79,548,313. Our operations and maintenance fund, we anticipate spending $14,539,516. We'll be making that debt service principal and interest payment. We typically make those at the June, July, and then we do those in December right before we go on break. That's the timing of those payments. So that is $14,405,331. And again, this pays off one of our bonds. Our transportation is $6,182,337. A large portion of this is about $2.1 million, which will be for purchasing of new buses. We have already encountered another delay in some of the delivery of our buses, so we may need to come back with that fleet management plan, but that does set aside the dollars for those purchases. And then our municipal retirement is just simply what we have to pay the government and IMRF, $3,149,511. Our capital projects, including those comments I made about having to pay June bills in July and over summer work, plus about $2.8 million additional funds that we'll do throughout the year, and then moving us through the end of the fiscal year. That will be a request of $14,037,925. We anticipate spending nothing on our working cash because that's an investment fund, and our tort because that's more like a liability fund. But we do anticipate the last fund, Fund 90, which is our fire prevention and safety, $711,270, and that should complete all that 10-year life health safety projects we had from the very beginning, and this should conclude and wrap those up. Total receipts, $132,574,203. Again, the need to fund our capital plan, so the revenue matches the expenses of $17,687,684. So our total expenses for the fiscal year would be $150,261,887, which is a new high for the district, but it does include an extremely large capital plan. So in total.
Can you go back just a second?
Absolutely.
It might be good just for people to, if you could quickly walk through the difference between the unaudited, the tentative, and the final funds transfer balance. Because there's such a large shift there that I think people would look at that and want to know a little bit more information if you could.
Yeah. Sure. So the unaudited is basically where we feel like the end of the fiscal year is without any adjustments because we are accrual. The auditor still has up to 60 days beyond the end of the fiscal year to make some adjustments. Then we came back from that initial number, and then the budget came back with a tentative that included about another $4.3 million. So those are the areas that we had additional requests or added costs that we didn't anticipate or may have been carried over from the prior year. There could also have been grants that we didn't spend in some form. It's not that full amount, but we would have carried over some other spending that we didn't get to. So we allow some adjustments within the budget. And then the final process of that $79 million is likely, just some of our last minute hiring that would have taken place till we get to that full FTE from where we think we're probably going to be at.
Yeah, so the 24, Todd, right? I mean, that's last year's budget. That's showing.
It is, just to
that's
get an
showing us
idea.
last year's budget as a,
Spending, but
Where we
yeah,
ended.
yes,
spending.
yeah, sorry, last year's actual
Yep.
spending, right?
Yep.
And then the tentative is after you got through all the preliminary and the draft and all that stuff and where we were. But the fund balance transfer number is lower there in the tentative budget because we hadn't, and you did mention this at the last meeting, you hadn't yet transferred all the money for some of these big capital projects that are now finally coming offline.
Right, many of them are timing, so I have to get a good idea where those projects are going to finish to tell me if they're going to be in one fiscal year or the other. And with almost all of our major projects over the summer, it's very difficult till we get those updates from our operations and maintenance director. And that's how those numbers on the bottom just kind of played out a little bit of the extra needed funds that we would have.
Right, but important for people to know when we're talking about fund transfer, that means money that we already have, right? That,
Right, so it's a pay-as-you-go, so we could accumulate funds and then do a project, which sometimes is very difficult. So we've been very fortunate as a district that we've accumulated those funds so we can make those major projects occur.
right,
And so that's cash on hand. What we currently do is we invest those dollars until we need them. In this case, now we're ready to use those dollars, so we'll be moving them out of an investment fund balance
Right.
into an actual expenditure for the district to make those projects happen.
right. So important to know, for people to know that number isn't like, again, that's money that we already had as the district. It's not like increasing a levy or anything like that.
Right, those are new dollars, and I'll get to the actual budget itself, and I'll show you those occur off of our typical revenue expense
Okay.
pages, and you'll see those kind of occur off the schedule, as I'd call it.
Okay.
You can see how those go in and out of funds on another presentation I have after this,
Perfect.
where I go over the budget document itself. You can see how those happen. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? Okay, so overall, this is our revenue, 119,802,398. Our expenses are estimated at 132,574,203. So we're looking at expenses that exceed revenue by this $12,771,805. That's the numbers, that's what it is.
Yep.
Then what we do is we add back those transfers that I mentioned so that we have the actual revenue, the transfer dollars, and the total cost that I referenced at the bottom of the revenue slide. The same with this particular side, which is the expenditures, and those are the two numbers that we'd see in the entirety when we actually maximize and utilize the budget. This is a revenue slide that I put here. This is actually what I will turn into the county. It's a little easier to read in your packet. But explains all the revenue that would come in through the different funds. It also includes the transfers that we'll use, even though the transfers themselves happen in what we call 6,000 and 7,000 account numbers, which are kind of off the schedule. The only way for me to actually make those occur is if I make them an expenditure out of one and a revenue other, because that hits the cash accounts, which actually moves the money. And so I report that back to the county when I turn this in and I file the budget, so they can actually see the total ask and how the dollars are going to be utilized. It's the same with the expenditures. I lay that out by salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies and materials. Capital, non-capital, again, non-capital is our tuition, and then our other that we would have. So each one of them has the total so they can see. And it's placed on file too, so it becomes a public document anybody can take a look at as well. It's placed on file. And so that reflects all the dollars that we've discussed, but it's in a different format that the county requires. And then this is basically a summary page. I won't go over this because I have it in the next presentation I'll move to, which is the budget itself. But essentially, this is what we call the summary page in the budget. It explains all of our fund balances that are unaudited. It explains the revenue that we would have by the sources. There is an on behalf requirement that comes in that basically just says, what would the district typically have? That's the 3998 number, which is right here. It basically reflects what the state puts into our pension system, that if we ever had to take on the liability that we would have to take on. It is significant. It does leave us the total revenue that we have, and then we go into the expenditures by areas such as instruction, our support services, our community services, which is a small number. That's like our parochial or private schools that we support. Our payments to other districts, which is really our tuition that we have. And then we actually have our debt service and our contingencies. And then it gives us a total expenditure amount that we have down here in this line. And then the on behalf goes in and out, so it's a zero number in the budget, and then that leaves us an estimated fund balance. So all of our funds basically came out balanced except for this fund and this fund, which we utilized some of our fund balance, and that happens from year to year. It's not always a perfect dollar for dollar, and so this kind of gives you a nice estimation that we needed more dollars to spend in our transportation fund because we're buying buses. And of course, capital projects is not a levied fund, so we have to move dollars in there, and that explains fund balance plus revenue minus expenses and what we'd need left to cover through transfers plus contingencies in case we had overages or something that come in as planned. Questions on that page? I'll get to it in the budget as well. You'll see it in a larger detail. This is what I mentioned I kind of call off the schedule. This is other uses of funds and other sources of funds. So it's basically how do we get money and how do we use money. Those are really just the fund balance of how they move between the funds. The ultimate bottom line is what we already talked about, which is our ending fund balance, but it takes into account those transfers here and basically gets us to our fund balance number estimated as of 6/30/2025. So this is how the auditor reports these as well. and how we record all these transactions.
Sorry, can you go back at the page? Just, it's hard for me to read it from here. So at the end of 2023, the fund balance was what, and what do we end, or 2024, sorry, and what do we expect it to be at the end of 2025?
Sure, so funds 10 through 90, and we had an opening fund balance of $83,504,123. Then we had our estimated, what we call direct receipts, and our estimated direct expenditures, and then our other use of funds, which is our fund transfers. And I estimate that this budget will have an ending estimated fund balance of $70,732,318, or a reduction of $12,771,805 from opening to ending.
To cover that.
So we're still significantly with our fund balance above
Healthy.
the rate that the state mandates that we need to be at. Other than, if we're not there, we have to have a special program to show how we're going to get there.
Right, and when we'll get to the AFR, when the auditor comes back, you'll see cash on hand, and it gives us how many days we can operate with the fund balance, and it'll report that we're very healthy. In the next document, you'll be able to see if we have to have a deficit reduction plan, and because we have those fund balances, we do not. So it allows us to take years of extras or extra costs where our expenditures exceed our revenue, and absorb those in our fund balances, because that can happen in a given year. And thankfully, our tax rates have been good. We have good investments, good fund balances, so we can absorb those changes from year to year. Other districts may have to have what they call tax anticipation warrants, where they have to basically borrow to pay, and we're not in that position. Nor do we have to borrow money and have additional debt, which comes with the interest payments. We're very fortunate not to be in that position. And then one of the next steps after you, I hope the board adopts the budget tonight, I will file it with the Kane County Clerk's Office. It becomes a public document. I'll also make sure that I file that with ISB, and they have a copy of our budget. Within our budget, too, you'll see in the next document, I also include what's new the last 2 years is our evidence-based funding spend plan, and how we use those dollars. Before, that used to be ESSER dollars for several years, and they changed our budget from year to year. And then I'll update the treasurer's report. You've kind of seen those estimated numbers. You'll have the budget in there, correct? You won't have the audited numbers, but it'll be very close. And then we'll prepare for the 2024 tax year levy, which is payable in 25 and 26 fiscal years. I'll work on the 5-year projection modeling that we brought back every year. We'll probably look and see like how good I was and how we really are now, and see how close we are, because I think that's important as well. And then the last thing is we'll begin our assumptions for the fiscal year 25, 26. So the budget and finance process never ends. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Anyone else?
I think
Dan?
the only thing that, that we just need to make sure that we communicate, and I'm hopeful that the community will recognize when we're not running a negative budget, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we have
Right.
capital expenditures that we have planned for, so big capital projects.
Right.
We have transportation, buses and things that we purchased. So those things combined have made, sure, people don't like to see the negative, but it's not a negative, because we
Right.
have the fund, as you mentioned, Paul, we have the fund balance to cover that, and so it's just the transfer, just so people understand that we're not running a negative budget this year,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
not, that's not it at all, right? It's just
Right.
that we had expenditures.
And we're like people's homes, right? Sometimes a hot water heater goes out, sometimes a roof has a leak, sometimes the sidewalk's got to be repaired. And so we do have some contingencies, and we do have part of that. If you think about some of the schools we built, they're well over, the last ones were 20-plus years old, so we do start to have some of the deterioration and maintenance and upkeep, and that's reflective.
Right, but we're lucky to be in a district where we have the fund balance in order to
Right.
cover those costs to absorb.
We've made sure our savings account is in a,
Exactly.
right? Just
Yep,
like
and
everyone else,
still, as Paul mentioned, still above the threshold that the state
Yes.
is requiring us to be, so.
Right, we don't want to be too high, and we don't want to be too low.
Exactly.
We're in that nice, soft spot where we want to be.
And I think the other comment is, for the public, that we know that for the next couple of years, we'll probably have a higher than normal capital spending plan but as you've mentioned, many of our buildings are over 20 years old, and we need to make sure we keep those updated. And this has been planned in the 7-year capital plan. So it's everything that's been out before, so it shouldn't be anything new. But when you see the hard numbers facing you, sometimes people,
Right.
they get a little bit surprised, and we just want to make sure people are not surprised by it.
Absolutely, and also they need to understand that deferred maintenance comes usually at a higher cost. Either the cost is, and especially when inflation hits it, becomes more, or your plans become outdated, and you have to update your plans that come at a cost, because we're required to have engineers and architects review everything that we do, which is different than maybe someone doing something on a residential level.
Right.
Okay, so here's the budget. This is how it looks. This is the opening page of the budget. It simply states that we are a school district, that we are on modified accrual. That allows us to go at the auditor's discretion and pull 60 days back into the current year. This is our fiscal year that we've announced. This is us. This is our county, and this is our school district, and this is our fiscal year. And the part that I will get dinged on till tonight is that at the end of this document, it tells me if I've satisfied all the requirements as a business official must for a budget. And I have to have your names in here, but I can't do that until you vote. And then we're all in good standing and we've met all the criteria. But that's how the document works. This is the budget summary that you just looked at. So again, it talks about a beginning balance up here in this particular line. It talks about our sources of revenue. The largest revenue that we have is through local sources. That's taxation, that's fees, that's through personal property replacement tax, that's through our investments. And then look at our state sources. So when we think about that, we think about our evidence-based funding. We split ours in two different categories. We put some of those dollars into the ed fund, the other part of it, our operations and maintenance, to make sure we have good learning facilities. And then we also put, we receive federal sources. So we think about our Title I low income, our Title II teacher quality, our Title III, our Title IV. Those are all areas that we address. Our Perkins, which is like counseling, our career tech ed. Those are all grants that we receive that come through state or federal dollars that we also receive. They're really reimbursements for expenditures, but they come back in as revenue. And then we get our on behalf payment, which is an estimation of what the state pays on behalf of our pension. We make our own contributions as employees in the district. They pay the majority of that. That dollar goes in and that dollar goes back out, so it's a zero. And we get this nice overall receipts that we have, receipts and revenues of sources. And then we have our expenses. I mentioned those come through instruction. So let me see if I can pull the page in here a little bit. The one part I think that's helpful for the, that's not the document. The other document will have totals for you. So if anyone would ask you, how much did we spend on a particular area? I don't want anybody to get dizzy here. The next document will show you how much we spend on regular education, how much we spend on special education, how much we spend on our support services. So those are documents that, so going forward, I'm going to provide the committee some financial documents you haven't had before. You've had them online, but I'm going to give it to you a nice book so you can flip through them in your meetings. You'll have the budget, you'll have the AFR, you'll have some of the other documents, that 5-year forecast at your fingertips, kind of, unless you want them on electronically. But those are all good things. So when the public asks you, what do we allocate toward our speech and language pathologists, those that might have some kind of speech needs, you can quickly get to that dollar, what's in the budget. All right, so we have our other costs that we have. We also have, so we have instruction, our support services, our community services, as I mentioned, our payments to other governments. We also have our debt in there, and then we have our total expenditures, which is in this area. And then the last line basically just says, what is that? And then what do we have for that estimated spend, revenue to expenses? We have to go farther down in the document. So we see this is basically explains the transfers. That's what happens on your spreadsheet. It's bigger than your screen. So this amount here would include basically $5 million plus our investment from transportation improvements that we would have set aside that basically come from the ed fund and the transportation into the operations and maintenance. We have this amount here, which is what we would have for bus sales. So we do have some revenue that kind of It's called sale of assets, so it doesn't count as traditional revenue. It occurs, but occurs off the schedule, but comes back later when we add everything up. This is our tech leases, so we use the money in the ed fund transfer, and we paid out of debt service because that is a debt obligation that we now have to pay for those. And then this is the total amount that we would need to move to the Fund 60 capital fund to make sure we can fund that for all of our projects. And the one below it just really just says, this is the transportation, that's the ed fund I mentioned. That's the tech leases, and this last part down here, again, is the capital funds going in and out. So they all balance, so when you see the presentation, the 17 million revenue minus 17 expenses, that's where it's reported on our budget sheet. And then again, it talks about how some of those balances occur. I do report student activity, which was a new area the last couple of years. So we have an opening, we have an estimated student revenue that comes in, the student expenses. So I have some fiduciary funds, so when students have funds that are collected, they flow into our main bank account, and then I reallocate those to the schools. So when you think about Pushcoin, when they buy something on the web store, I'm kind of the clearinghouse for those student funds, so I do have to report basically what I have at the end of June because I still am holding that money, and then I estimate what I will bring in for the year and give back to them. And then we always have an ending fund balance because that's kind of how the get it in 1 month, give it back in another, and I have to report that as the fiduciary or responsible party. And then this is just, again, the summary of all those funds I just mentioned, and that they put them all together in a more defined way. When you get to this last page, it does take that information I mentioned about your salaries and your benefits and explains them by each of the funds. That's more of a summative page for a lot of our expenditures. It's a nice place to go to. So if you have a question of, how much do we spend in supplies and materials for the education fund, you can find that information by column and row. So just a nice resource to go through. You can use that to compare for previous years if you're bored and want something to do on the weekend. That's a great place to take a look and see if we're trending correctly. This is our cash document. So again, it starts with our opening balance, and it just kind of explains how some of those revenues occur overall. So it'll talk about our direct receipts. It'll talk about what's available. So that would be just balance plus total revenue. We look at all the dollars across all the funds that we have allocated. Won't get too deep into that, but that's basically a cash reporting page. And then it's basically the same thing when we have our disbursements on the bottom. It's just a cumulative document for cash per se, because we do keep cash accounts in the district. So we have revenue expenses, we have liabilities and assets, and we have a Q, which is a equity, which is another report that we have. And then this is our revenue. So we explain our levies on the top. So you can see what we levied in each of the funds. You can see where the personal property replacement tax comes in. That's basically a business receipt that we have that's flowed through the Illinois Department of Revenue to us. We don't get, one of the other adjustments, you asked about why do some of these numbers change. We get an estimate and then we get a final right before I do the budget and finalize it. And then we can see too where we had some just tuition from some pupils that may pay for it. So that's an example of some of, like I report GILT differently because that's a different payment of some of the funds. And tuition from some of our other parents. This is basically an employee benefit that we have where employees of the district that have served here long enough can let their children attend and they pay a proportionate share. And same thing, we report our transportation fees, so those would be our student riders, so that means that they, if you live more than 1.5 miles, you get free transportation. If you live less than that, you can pay a fee, and as long as we have capacity, we'll pick you up. The co-curricular are basically more like field trips, I think more like St. Pete's. Our lunch sales, this estimates our lunch sales as well. So we plan on doing about $1.7 million in food service, so it is significant. We do have report sales to our staff and other food service, so when you think about some of our boosters and those types of things, we do provide food to them and they reimburse us. We do report that. We have our athletic admissions of $70,000. We do have our student registration fees and some of the sales that we have through other fees as well. The operations and maintenance, $65,000. is actually a tax that we report back that we get through personal property replacement tax. Most of it goes to the ed fund, but there was a cutoff in time, so we still report some of that into our operations and maintenance and other funds. And then this is our revenue from other local sources. So we talk about if we have rentals or donations from private sources. So when you have those come through and there are donations, we do collect those and report those back in the budget. We estimate those. We do have some prior year refunds. We have some proceeds from contracts that we have. And we just have some other local fees that are usually miscellaneous fees. You think of things like jury duty. So we have a benefit for our employees. What's called the jury duty. They turn the check into us and we pay them for the full day, but we report back what we received in their jury duty check. And then these are some of the grants that we receive. This is evidence-based funding. Right here, it's kind of split evenly between the ed funding, the operations, and maintenance. We do have some special education dollars that we pay for some of our private placement, as well as some of our orphanage that we have. You'll see those come back, and those are revenues after we expend them. The CTI was our career tech, so we do have a program that we report back on the revenue from that as well. We do have our driver's education out here as well. That's our $12,000. So everything that comes back in revenue, we report on this in a very obvious and transparent way. I don't know how much you want me to go through all of this. Let's go quick, jump over the expenditures so we can see part of that as well. So this is the area where I was explaining to you that if you do have questions of how we spend our money and how much we spend on our regular education or special needs students or our career tech ed or some of our other programs like summer or gifted, this is the part of the expenditures that you can go and see how we invest those dollars in those different areas of education. I'll just cover a couple more areas. Just a little farther down are some of our support services. So when we think of things like our social workers or our guidance services, our health area, our psychologists, school psychologists, our SLPs, that information all comes in down here, so you can see how the district spends those dollars and invests in our employees, which benefit our students. Occasionally, we have some account numbers that don't match up perfectly, so the budget requires me to explain what those are. We do have a sub-caller you can see there, and we do have report debt services. So the example might be if the fund says 30-5300, it could be 30-5310. It's our old accounting system that we have, so I have to report those separately. This is the area that says overall is there a deficit budget. You can see clearly the results in blue that says that the budget is balanced, there is no deficit plan required, so that tells me we're doing the right thing. And we do have a deficit reduction plan. I think I was asked previously by you, Paul, like, does this get filled out in a previous year? It does if that says I don't have that nice blue comment. I have to explain how I'm going to get us within good standing, and that's the process, and I have to report that. I do have an area too, if we do have a deficit reduction, which we do not, but I have to explain why I picked those numbers and what they mean. So this is a new area. I'll just quickly cover this. It started last year in our budget process. This is the evidence-based spending plan. The key here is, I'll just kind of highlight a few of these here. This is just really about evidence-based funding where we spend our dollars on our low-income students, our English learners, and our special education students. That's really what that EBF does, is to shore up those areas in education. And then you'll be pleased to know these are the only new dollars we get this year because we're a Tier 4 school, so we have an extra $4,394 that I can allocate. And then I have to, it's good, it's a good problem, don't get me wrong, but that is the new part. And then I come down here and explain how I will spend those new dollars. So I've allocated those with learning and teaching's consent, basically looking at some of our specialist teachers, and we can spend those dollars differently if we wish. These are just some of our administrative costs. I have to report three main categories: the superintendent's office, my office, and our student services. And the state looks at it every year to make sure that we're being adequate in that process. It's in the budget. And then this is just some of our vendor contracts. This is if we have some agreements. Most of these are photography related, as well as a book fair, that schools will receive those funds. This tells me if I don't know what something means, where I can go to look it up. And the last page is what we call the error page. So as I start with the budget, these are all in red, and as I satisfy an area and I've done it correctly, it's removed and it's replaced with green. So the good news is it is all green. So I'll give you just a quick overview. The deficit reduction plan is not needed, therefore we passed that. Our cover page is correct. The only area that's not is after you vote tonight, I will have your names entered in there. You'll actually sign it, and then I type it in for ISB, and I report the signed document to the county. Our budget summary has met all the requirements. Is it balanced? Are the transfers reported? Is there interest? Is there debt? Those are all in good standing with this budget process. I do report the summary of our cash transactions, which was the cash page. And then I also explain our beginning and ending fund balances. It clearly says they cannot be negative, and they are not. And then I also have to report all the receipts and disbursements, which I've done. I report our estimated revenue, our expenditures, and then I have placed any notes in there of revenue expenditures that aren't obvious that I explained to ISB about what those might be if they're a different accounting number than what is traditional. And then lastly, our evidence-based spending plan. So that kind of concludes the overall budget document, so we have a better understanding of that, and you're welcome to reach out to me later if you have any other questions.
All right, thank you. That was very thorough.
Thank
It is
you.
helpful to go through this document. You show it in your presentation, but to kind of go through it is helpful to see how it all comes together. Anyone have any other questions or thoughts?
No?
Share?
Anything from the tentative in August that, I didn't see anything. I just wanted to make sure that there was anything that you had noticed that that we should make note of, or?
Just that our personal property replacement tax continues to decline. There were some years where it was miscalculated, and other years it was changed, so I did have to reduce that. Those would have been additional spending dollars, essentially. That and our capital are really the two that stood out for me.
Okay.
I think it represents a good job of estimation of all of our agreements with our employees and all the benefits that we provide and all the service agreements that we have to operate the district and make sure that we have everything in place that we need to operate. So I'm very confident it's a good budget for us to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 5, future agenda items. We have nothing there. Item number 6, items for a recommendation to the full board. We have the overview of the 2024-25 final budget. I'll make a motion to move that on to the full board. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. All right, we'll move it on to the full board. Item number 7, information legislative update. I don't have anything at this time. Dr. Barrett? No? All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we stand adjourned until our next meeting. Thank you.